Mm. Okay. Welcome to What the F is Going On in Latin America and the Caribbean, CODEPINK's weekly YouTube program of hot news out of the region. We broadcast every Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on CODEPINK's YouTube channel. Tonight, you can also find us on my Facebook live stream and also on Medea Benjamin's live stream. And so let me introduce the theme tonight, and then we've got 4 fantastic speakers this evening. I have to say, they're all terrific friends of mine, so I'm so pleased to have you all here. And they're all, really, really successful activists as well. So let me just tell you a little bit about the theme tonight. The month of November is filled with elections across much of Central America and some of South America as well, beckoning many of us to say that the hemisphere will look very different economically and politically at the end of the month versus how it looks this evening. This month, we will witness elections on November 7, presidential elections in Nicaragua, legislative elections in Argentina on November 14, presidential elections in Chile, and regional and municipal elections in Venezuela on November 21st. And then we will close the month, November 28th, presidential elections in Honduras. Today's broadcast will focus on the upcoming elections in Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Honduras. And we are going to discuss each in chronological order of the elections, so 7, 21, and 28. And I will say again, we are most fortunate to be joined in conversation by 3 very knowledgeable representatives of each of the 3 countries we're going to be discussing. But first, I want to introduce my co-host. And then before we start each segment of the program, I will introduce the respective speakers to you so that it's clear who they are and what they're going to be talking about. So my co-host this evening is Fred Mills. And Fred is the Deputy Director of the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, COHA, COHA.org. And he's also Professor of Philosophy at Bowie State University. So welcome, Fred.
Well, thank you. It's really an honor to be on this program sponsored by CODEPINK and to be with the panelists who are each experts on the countries on which they're going to be speaking. I just wanted to provide a brief analysis of the context. And basically, what we're witnessing is a drive by Washington to recolonize Latin America. And part of the strategy is to impose ever more economic hardship and subvert democratic institutions of nations that are seeking alternatives to what's really a failed neoliberal economic model. And this has implications for what's happening on the US-Mexican border. These aggressions are directly related to the conditions which uproot thousands of the most vulnerable who are now seeking refuge in 3rd countries, including the United States. But it must be said, despite the hardships that are imposed by this economic war against Venezuela, and now with the Renace Act, we can anticipate against Nicaragua, and we know about the longstanding embargo against Cuba, this aggression is being met with a determined Bolivarian movement for regional independence and integration. And really, for the peoples of Latin America and the Caribbean, there's no turning back. The historic tide of self-determination, the effort of decolonization, and the advancement of a multipolar world. Some refer to this as a pink tide, but in essence, it's a movement for which there's no turning back. As you mentioned, the presidential elections and parliamentary elections are going to happen soon in Nicaragua on the 7th. Regional and municipal elections in Venezuela, November 21st. There's going to be general elections in Honduras, November 28th. And the US is now leading a campaign to delegitimize these democratic procedures. And this campaign's in full force. It includes a multi-dimensional strategy. And the US can always count on its right-wing allies in the Organization of American States to do some of the dirty work. So it's critical to avoid another OAS orchestrated coup during the elections as occurred in Bolivia in 2019. So very briefly, on the 16th, Washington intensified its economic war in Venezuela by kidnapping Alex Saab. He's a Colombian businessman and special envoy, Venezuelan envoy, who managed to circumvent illegal unilateral US sanctions to import vitally needed food, medicine, fuel, and other goods to Venezuela. Now, it's important to note that this act of aggression against Caracas sabotaged talks that were underway between the government and opposition. It was taking place in Mexico, and it dealt a serious blow to international conventions that protect diplomats. So really, what's been happening in the US relationship to Venezuela is on full display the arrogance of the so-called rules-based order, by means of which US exceptionalism manufactures its own form of legality to suit political aims. Now, in the case of Nicaragua, the US Congress has passed new legislation, the Renacer Act, and this is to wage economic warfare, like we saw in the case of Venezuela, against the Sandinista government. And US continues to use NGOs as vehicles for building anti-government institutions. At the Council on Hemispheric Affairs, Terry, we maintain that it's up to the people of Nicaragua to decide their own destiny, not hardliners in Miami, the State Department, who are bent on installing a compliant neoliberal regime. And finally, in the case of Honduras, there's a historic opportunity for the people of this Central American nation to restore their democracy. Their constitutional government was undermined by a US-backed coup in 2009 against the democratically elected government of Manuel Zelaya. And last week, Honduras' Freedom and Refounding Party, Libre, leader Xiomara Castro, and the Savior Party, President Salvador Nasrallah, the president of that party, they forged an alliance, and this is very important, to face the neoliberal National Party in the November 28th general elections. Look, the US drive to dominate Latin America and the Caribbean is facing determined resistance from Bolivarian forces throughout the Americas. So I don't think we ought to be pessimistic, though we ought to be on guard. Progressive governments are making a comeback. There's a growing movement led by Mexico to leave the OAS in favor of a uniquely Latin American regional organization. The organized expressions of popular power throughout the region make it clear that there's no surrendering their sovereignty and dignity to the recolonization of their territory. So I look forward to the insights of our panelists to make this situation even more clear and transparent.
Thank you so much, Fred. I always love talking with you because you're always so clear and articulate in your thoughts. And I so appreciate your insight on Latin America and all of your work. And I'm really honored that you had time to join us this evening. And I'm happy to see all of our guests tonight. I should mention to our audience that I'm actually broadcasting live from Managua, Nicaragua this evening. I'm here to observe the presidential elections to be held Sunday, November 7th. So let's move to Nicaragua. Those are the first elections this month. And so these will be presidential elections with incumbent Daniel Ortega, the front runner. And I want to introduce our next guest, Camilo Mejía. Camilo is a Nicaraguan activist based in Miami, Florida. He is a veteran and conscientious objector of the war in Iraq, where he witnessed crimes against humanity by the United States military. So Camilo, welcome to our program. I'm so pleased to be in conversation with you this evening.
Thank you, Terry. It's a real honor to be here with these co-panelists who are really amazing people. Thank you, Fred, for that great context that you provided to set the stage. I'd like to start by saying that there are many ways to look at what's happening in Nicaragua right now with the upcoming elections on Sunday. We could look at it historically and go back to the 1850s, you know, when the US first set its eyes in Nicaragua, because we have a naturally made interoceanic canal that would make it very easy for people to go from east to west, you know, and find gold on the west coast of the US. So either to prevent the building of a canal that would rival the US canal in Panama, or to build a canal the US has had, you know, a strategic interest in Nicaragua, and from then on has not ceased to intervene in our country's affairs. So we could go back in history, you know, for centuries. But I think that right now in the present context, you know, and I think that Fred provided a really great explanation of what that context is. But I believe that with the neoliberal, the globalist neoliberal policies having failed, and Nicaragua being a nation that is so small and so poor in relation, especially to the United States, that is able to provide amazing benefits for all its citizens, including universal health care, education, you know, production programs, you know, hunger and poverty eradication, in contrast with the neoliberal system that basically strangles not only the poor, but also the middle class and even the upper class in the countries that see their natural resources, their labor, and the environment completely destroyed by neoliberal policies. And to have an example like Nicaragua, providing all these benefits to its citizens, providing its protecting its sovereignty, and then being able to meet not only the basic needs of every Nicaraguan, but to go beyond and, you know, see amazing economic growth and things like that. Nicaragua represents an existential threat to the very idea of neoliberalism. But, you know, going to a more recent context, I think that many people here, I would hope, remember the attempted coup in 2018. Where it was a largely social media driven, and I know our brothers and sisters in Venezuela are well aware of that, because we learned a lot of the lessons that they had learned in Venezuela. But a lot of that was basically social media driven, and we have seen also how the big tech companies have basically canceled so many different, like 1,000 different accounts in the lead up to the election. And I think that that's really telling of, you know, where this is going, because a lot of those accounts, you know, the groups that were canceled, the accounts, the individual accounts that were canceled, the pages that were canceled, many of them basically originated in response to the misinformation campaign of 2018, when basically they took us off guard. And we had to learn basically to fight, you know, through social media and to create pages where we could show that the violence, you know, was actually being perpetrated by so-called peaceful protesters. And so to see that in the lead up to the Sunday election, they're deleting thousands of accounts, pages, and groups. It's basically, you know, an announcement that there's going to be unrest in Nicaragua, and that they don't want the actual Sandinista version to go out. You know, they want the public to have only one version of the story. So that's one thing that we're seeing. Of course, today, the Renacer Act was approved by the House, you know, after being amended by the Senate. And this is going to, once again, you know, provide the coercive measures that the US utilizes when they're not able to bend the will of the people to basically vote for governments that are subservient to US interests. And so what we're seeing right now has also been detailed in a document titled RAIN, which stands for Responsive Assistance in Nicaragua, that was leaked by the US Embassy last year, if I'm not mistaken, around the July timeframe. in which the United States, through the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, through its financing, basically foresees several different scenarios to destabilize the government of Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo. And they include natural disasters, which we had two big hurricanes that hit us and hit Honduras to the north, and a public health crisis, which we have in the form of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then political turmoil, which is what we're basically seeing right now with the disinformation campaign around the election that, in my opinion, seeks to destabilize the electoral process, knowing that, by all stretches of the imagination and also by all polls out there and surveys that have been conducted, the Sandinista government has a very, easy victory coming up on Sunday. We have, I believe, the latest polls, by M&R consultants, which have been conducting polls in Nicaragua and Central America and Latin America for a long time, put the Sandinista the Sandinista party at 63% in relation to the opposition, which I believe that the opposition has 23% of the vote, that they can count on, and that's split between different parties that don't even represent necessarily U.S. interests in the nation, because a lot of the people who had been involved in the 2018 attempted coup, who were the recipients of USAID funding to basically destabilize Nicaragua, not only in 2018, but also in the lead up to the elections, who have been arrested. They never really had unity. They never really had official political parties. They had no political platforms or anything like that. But even the opposition outside of that opposition, that has been dismantled, in its effort to destabilize the country in the context of the election, they really have no chance of winning. And so what we're seeing is that, lacking all other recourses, the United States only has coercion left, and lies and manipulation of information. And so that's basically more or less what we're seeing right now, is that, we're seeing, on one hand, we're seeing the blackout in terms of like the media, the social media cancellation. Of course, the US propaganda machine with global reach has already been added, basically delegitimizing the government of Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo. And we have the sanctions, and God knows what else we can expect to happen. I know that the State Department issued a warning to US citizens in Nicaragua, telling them to stay off the streets between November 5th and November 7th. So we don't really know what's happening. But, like Fred said, there's no turning back. And, this is not our first time around the block. We have been fighting US aggression and US intervention for a long time. And we're going to continue what we do. We're going to continue fighting for our revolution, and we're going to continue fighting for our democracy and our sovereignty.
Oops, sorry, folks. Thank you, Camilo. I can tell you, I'm sitting here in Managua tonight, and the streets are very calm, and it's been fascinating and horrifying simultaneously to watch what's happened. I arrived on Sunday, and Monday was that State Department communique, and then Tuesday was the shutdown of all those Facebook accounts, and now today from Washington, D.C. was the passing of the Renaissance Act in the U.S. House of Representatives, and that act was simultaneously introduced in late May, June in both houses of Congress. So you can really see how everything is basically orchestrated, these simultaneous events or contiguous events. So let's so thank you, and stay with us, because we're going to want to have a more in-depth conversation with everyone. So next, let's move to the elections on November 21st in Venezuela. And those will be regional and municipal elections. And tonight we're joined by my CODEPINK Latin America teammate, Leonardo Flores. Leo holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy from the University of Maryland. He dropped out of the master's program at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy to work as an analyst on US-Venezuelan relations. He was born in Venezuela and maintains close ties to social movements that have transformed the country over the past 20 years. So welcome, Leo. I'm glad to be sharing the program with you tonight.
Thanks so much, Terry, and thanks, Fred, for also hosting. And also, I just want to give a quick shout out to the group of Latin American immigrants in DC who had this idea for this webinar to kind of really demonstrate what's going on in the region this month. So thank you for that. So in Venezuela, November 21st, we're having what's called mega elections. They're called mega elections because there are elections for governors, mayors, regional legislative councils, and municipal councils. Overall, there's 3,082 positions at stake. And there are 70,000 candidates running from 104 parties. The vast majority of those belong to the opposition. And we have observers, electoral observation mission from the European Union, UN panel of electoral experts will be there. CELA, which is the Council of Latin American Electoral Experts, will be there as well observing. The Carter Center, and observers from dozens of countries, including Russia, Turkey, and the US. I know you, Fred, and you, Terry, will be there as well to observe. And these elections are pretty important because, generally, gubernatorial elections in different countries, they kind of escape our radar because we think, oh, they're not that important in terms of global geopolitics. But these are important because it's the first time since 2017 that the entire opposition is fully participating in elections. And so I was going to just run you through the timeline real quick from elections from 2017 until 3 weeks from now, because I think it's kind of important to get a sense of how the country has developed in that interim. So in July 2017, there was elections for the National Constituent Assembly. These came about because Venezuela was in a period of crisis in 2017. There were very violent street protests promoted and financed and supported by what we know as the extreme opposition in Venezuela. And these protests basically died the day of the elections. And the opposition boycotted those elections. They said it was unconstitutional, despite the fact that it wasn't, because the president has the power to call for those elections. And it was, in my opinion, I think it was a huge mistake for the opposition to boycott those elections because they might have won and they might have been able to help redraft the Constitution. But then in October 2017, Venezuela held gubernatorial elections. And these are important because, as I mentioned before, this was the last time the opposition fully participated. They being the opposition, they were framing this as a referendum on President Maduro. They said if they won the majority of states that he should resign. Their pollsters were predicting a landslide victory. They thought they were going to take anywhere between 18 and 20 of Venezuela's 23 states. But the reality was the exact opposite. Chavismo won in 18 states. And a close inspection of the vote showed that Chavismo also won in nearly 90% of the country's municipalities. So as a result of that vote, the next election was in December 2017 when Venezuela held mayoral and regional elections. But since they had already lost in 90% of the country's municipalities, it was such a humiliating defeat that the opposition called for a boycott of those elections. Except in reality, it wasn't a true boycott, it was a sham boycott, because what we had was opposition candidates. They ran in the municipalities where they thought they were going to win, but they didn't register under their own parties. They registered under smaller parties so they could maintain the fiction that the opposition had boycotted these elections. Again, Chavismo won in a landslide victory. They took 308 of the country's 335 mayoralties. The next elections were the infamous, quote unquote infamous, May 2018 Venezuela presidential elections. And the first thing I should note is that these elections were actually brought forward a year. They were supposed to be held in 2019, but the opposition had spent years saying that they wanted new elections now. So the Maduro government said, okay, let's hold them this year instead of next year. Let's push them up, hopefully bring more peace and stability to the country. But unfortunately, the Trump administration basically orchestrated a boycott of those elections. In late January 2018, as the Venezuelan government and opposition were about to sign a comprehensive landmark deal that encompassed everything from the economy to elections, the US sabotaged those talks. Then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said he would welcome a coup. The US hinted at an oil embargo, and the State Department also said it would not recognize Venezuela's presidential elections that year. This was in January. It was months before the elections were held and weeks before they were even announced. Already the US was kind of poisoning the elections there. And additionally, the Trump administration pressured opposition politicians not to run. In fact, Henry Ramos Salud, who was the president at the time of Acción Democrática, Democratic Action, one of the major opposition parties in Venezuela, he was asked by the press if he was going to run, and he said, "Why would I run if the US government won't recognize my victory?" So they had even made it clear to opposition candidates that they wouldn't recognize that victory. And at the time, it was very confusing. Why would the US do this? Well, the idea was to discredit the elections so much that the Trump administration could then impose a new president once President Maduro's term ran out in January 2019. That's when they named Juan Guaido as the interim president, and this whole fiction of the parallel government began. So already in the previous year, those elections were supposedly discredited by the US because they had this strategy for Juan Guaido in place. But that said, an important sector of the opposition did run, and they won 3 million votes between them, compared to President Maduro, who took, I believe, around 6 million votes on that occasion. Then the next elections were December 2020. Venezuela held legislative elections. I think you were there, Terry, as an observer as well. Again, there was a partial opposition boycott by the main parties, but they were also kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because they knew that if they participated, it would be de facto recognition that the electoral system works, meaning that therefore President Maduro was legitimate. But they also couldn't participate because the Trump administration's strategy was to boycott. And by the time they had to register for the elections, it wasn't clear whether Trump was going to win here in the US in 2020. So if they participated and Trump won, then it would be basically a slap in the face to Trump, who was telling them not to participate. Again, though, it wasn't a full boycott. The moderate opposition, and I call them moderate because this is a sector of the opposition that doesn't want to burn the country down. They haven't called for an invasion. They denounced sanctions. And that's how they're moderate, because I mean, some of these guys are very neoliberal to the extent that they would make University of Chicago economists blush. But anyway, these moderates, they ran, they won 20 seats. And so this was a massive, massive victory for Chavismo, despite the relatively low turnout. And the fact is that the opposition actually took credit for this low turnout. The opposition, the more extreme opposition led by Juan Guaido, they portrayed that as evidence of their own popular support. So that leads us into now, November 21st, these elections. These are going to be the 26th elections in 23 years for Venezuela. So, I mean, all this talk about a dictatorship with no free elections, it's total BS. The latest polls show, or they're projecting rather, somewhere between 40–50% voter turnout. I think if there's low voter turnout, and here, it's hard to predict elections in Venezuela, but I'm pretty confident saying that if there's low participation, say less than 40%, it's going to be Chavismo winning in a landslide, because the Chavista vote is very kind of secure, and they understand the importance of elections. If there's kind of good participation, which I'm going to characterize as somewhere between 40–50%, I think it's very unlikely we're going to get higher than 50% participation. I still think Chavismo has a good opportunity to win a majority of the races. And in fact, opposition pollster Luis Vicente Leon from the firm called Data Analysis, he said that the chances of the opposition winning are infinitesimal. That said, I think the opposition is going to do better than it did in 2017, when it only won 5 of 23 states and 27 of the 335 mayoralties. I think there's going to be a little bit more opposition victories. But the big outstanding question is, after 4 years of boycotts, can the extreme right draw its people out? I mean, if we look at the turnout rates over these last 4 years, those gubernatorial elections, when everyone participated, it was 61% turnout. 2 months after that, turnout for the municipal elections dropped to 47%. A year later, for the presidential elections, it was 46%. 2 years after that, for legislative elections, it was 31%. So this strategy of boycotting elections has really depressed voter turnout, but that doesn't necessarily translate into, support for these extreme opposition tactics, in part because the opposition is completely split. So right now in these elections, they're running as two major coalitions: the MUD, the Democratic Unity Roundtable, which is kind of the traditional coalition of the past 10 or 15 years in Venezuela, and now the so-called the Democratic Alliance. And the Democratic Alliance is made up of parties and candidates that participated in 2018 and 2020, and that have been engaging in ongoing dialogue with the Maduro government. I mean, the opposition is actually like running multiple gubernatorial candidates in at least 9 states. And in the state of Miranda, which is, right where part of Caracas is located, there's 2 opposition candidates who are slinging all sorts of mud for each other. An opposition candidate just held a press conference yesterday accusing another opposition candidate of having campaign rallies where they were giving away motorcycles, phones, and boxes of food. So, I mean, this sort of infighting is going to be really difficult for the opposition to overcome, to the extent that now they're kind of changing the goalposts and they're saying, well, this election isn't so much about winning, it's about building unity within the opposition, and it's about finding new leadership within the opposition as well. On the side of Chavismo, Chavismo is mostly united. There's the main coalition called the Great Patriotic Pole, which includes the PSUV, and they're expected to take the bulk of the Chavista vote. There is also a smaller coalition known as the APR, Alternativa Popular Revolucionaria. They're running a separate slate of candidates as they did in 2020, but they got only 1 seat in those elections, taking less than 3% of the vote. So it's not expected that they're going to split the Chavista vote. And just, very briefly, a bit about the economic situation, because that's obviously going to determine, have an important factor in voter turnout. Right now, inflation is down to single digits for the first time in 4 years. You had Credit Suisse projecting 5.5% growth for Venezuela in 2021. Oil production continues to recover, which is being helped by shipments of diluents from Iran. The parallel exchange rate has stabilized, and 50% of Venezuelans, this was a poll in August, 50% of Venezuelans said their life had improved compared to 1 or 2 years ago. And so I think that kind of shows very clearly where we're at in terms of the political and the economic situation in Venezuela. And one last point that I kind of forgot to mention, and as to why the opposition is in dire straits, 76% of Venezuelans reject sanctions. And the entire Mood coalition is made up of parties that have called for more and more sanctions against the Venezuelan people. And I think that's going to hurt them quite a bit at the polls.
Well, it's a call, of basically hybrid war against your own people when you're calling for sanctions. There's one thing that, there's so many things you said we'll have to talk when all of you are done, when our panel discussion presentations are done. But this finding the leadership of the opposition, trying to find new leadership and trying to unify itself, that is something we heard. You were gracious enough to arrange for a meeting with the opposition for our delegation to Venezuela in December of 2020. And we were able to meet with those parties of the opposition that actually participated in the National Assembly elections last year. And they actually admitted that. These were the parties that participated and believe in the electoral process and believe in the Venezuelan Constitution, which we don't hear much about those people in the United States. But that was one of the things they flat out said, was that they have to, they have to evolve and develop themselves as politicians, as candidates, as parties. So, and also you and Fred are both, you and Camilo have both talked about countries, Nicaragua and Venezuela both, who have governments that invest in their people, a people over profits system, economic system led by the state. And we're seeing this, and Fred touched on this, that we're seeing this joke, this clash throughout the hemisphere, I would say throughout the world, but specifically in the hemisphere of the Americas, where these governments that want to manage 100% privatized economies, where the profit comes first and the people come second, and these systems that are putting their people first. And it's a real clash throughout the hemisphere right now. And we're hoping, Lucy, that the Hondurans will be able to vote in a government, a president and a government that is going to promote its people over profits, which we have seen the people in Honduras suffer for so long now over a privatized economic system. It's just been devastating to the people, the environment, and the economic well-being. So let's Let's move to Honduras. Those elections are on November 28th. These are presidential elections. And we are joined by Lucy Pagoada-Quesada. Lucy is the New York City Department education teacher and human rights defender. She is the coordinator of Partido Libre, US Canada, and she is the producer of the program Voices of Resistance, which broadcasts every Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern on WBAI 99.5 FM, New York City. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you very much, compañera Terry, and what an honor it is to be in your program. It's the first time that I'm in your program. However, you've been in my program so many times.
I know, you're
and
so
everyone
wonderful.
everyone here has been to my program. Every single one of you. So
we
thank you
love
so much.
you and we love your program.
Thank you. And I really hope to continue these amazing interviews that we're always having. Well, in neoliberalism, people don't come second. People never come. It's not about people. They're never present in the idea of neoliberalism. And as you mentioned, Honduras is 25 days away from entering a fourth election after the US coup in 2009 under the presidency of President Barack Obama and his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. And we have to understand that in Honduras, we cannot speak about the present without going back to what happened and everything that coup actually has meant for the people of Honduras.
So for our
Brutal
audience, this was the
repression.
coup of June 2009. For our audience,
Yes.
2009.
Yes, 2009, 12 years, and we're still standing very strongly against the coup and against U.S. imperialism, which was the perpetrator of this coup. And going back to this idea of governments that actually think about the people, that was basically one of the main reasons why the U.S. Under Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton decided that they were going to kidnap President Zelaya in the middle of the night in his pajamas on June 28, 2009, because he was actually doing a government that looked out for the people. Part of it had to do with importing oil from Venezuela, because President Zelaya signed in with Petrocaribe, and he had also signed with Alba. So the coup against President Zelaya was also a coup against Venezuela. Let's not forget that. And this is the reason why the people of Honduras rose up. So to us, the fact that today, 12 years after the coup, we're still here, standing strongly than ever, means that the coup failed because neoliberalism has failed in Honduras. And the people of Honduras can no longer take it. The people of Honduras are looking for alternatives, just like most people in Latin America are. We cannot forget Bolivia. We have to see what has happened in Bolivia, the amazing government of the indigenous people of Bolivia. And this is a trend. It's a trend that has been going on in Latin America for the past 20 years. So Honduras is not an exception to the rule. Honduras is only part of that big movement that is looking for alternatives against failures of neoliberalism and capitalism in our countries. We don't want it, we refuse it, and we are fighting to go for an alternative. And so we went from having an amazing popular movement, the resistance, to turning that movement into a political party, because we believe that we could do this in a democratic way, right? They say we have to use the democratic means, so that's what we are doing. And of course, the United States will always find the ways to confront the people of Honduras. And as I said, this is the fourth election, the first election after the coup in 2009, November of 2009. We did not participate because obviously we didn't have a party, and we were abstaining from that brutality because those elections happened in the middle of all the repression and the people being killed, the women being raped on the streets. The repression was brutal by the military and the police, which to me in Honduras, the police and the army only serves for a couple of things: to repress, to kill, and to disappear the people, not to protect the people. We already know that. So those elections happened in the midst of that. But then the movement that came out of that opposition against the U.S. imperialist coup turned into a political party. So in 2012, we created the Libre Party, and we went into elections in 2013. And that was the first fraud that we suffered. And it was the Libre Party with Xiomara Castro de Celaya as our candidate, right? And the United States intervened. They imposed the National Party in 2010 with Porfirio Lobo Sosa. We called it the inflated president, el presidente inflado, Porfirio Lobo, because it was all, we abstained, and he pretty much ran on his own. That was Hillary Clinton's candidate, a narco, the first narco that she actually supported in Honduras. Why do I say a narco? Because his son Fabio Lobo, it's in prison. He was sentenced for 30-something years in a New York prison. So that was the first narco. Then later in 2017, we ran against the elections and we formed the first alliance. Compañero Fred referred to that. And, there was fraud again. And this is when the United States Embassy, the government, supported and imposed Juan Orlando Hernandez for the second time, right? He ran for the second time. There is no re-election in Honduras, and he actually fired the people in court, the judges, and those judges were able to say that his new judges, right, his own judges, were able to say that he could run. So Juan Orlando Hernandez ran for the second time, and again the U.S. Embassy, right, declared Juan Orlando Hernandez the winner, right, against Narrala, who had won the elections. So what we see is a pattern of U.S. occupation in Honduras that has been historically. It's not just the 12 years ago. We're talking about, from the very early 1900s in Honduras, when, early 1900s, the United States turned Honduras into a banana republic. And we saw the abuses of the United States companies against the Honduran people. Those were in place of enslavement of the Honduran people. And since the United States has always decided in Honduras who's going to be ruling the show, until President Zelaya came along and said, enough, we need to defend our dignity. We need to do something. And so the price was that he was expelled from his own country. He was, taken out, and we continue to fight. So now we're going back the fourth time, and this is the third time for the Libre Party. Now, Xiomara Castro again is the candidate, and Salvador Narrala joined again, right, with the Pino Party. And we have this presidential coalition only at the presidential level. And we've learned from our mistakes as the movement. We've come along, and now we are more organized than ever in Honduras, but also outside of Honduras. And I'm a testimony of that, because I've been in this process. It's not that I've read it or somebody told me, but I've been invested my entire life, just like my family and the entire movement that I represent here in the United States and other parts of Latin America, and even in Europe. This is an amazing movement, the movement of the Honduran people. So we're ready for the 28th. We know that the embassy is there. For this time around, they're not as aggressive as they have been. And we think part of it is because they're probably fed up of Juan Orlando Hernandez, because Juan Orlando is another drug dealer. He's another, drug lord in Honduras. So is this pattern of the United States supporting these drug thugs in Honduras. Tony Hernandez, Juan Orlando Hernandez's brother, also was sentenced in a New York prison, in a New York court for trafficking tons of cocaine and weapons into the United States. So I think that the United States right now in Honduras is a little bit conflicted by the fact that they have been throughout all these years supporting these corrupt thugs, which not that the United States cares much about who they support, whether it is a corrupt government or not. But I feel that because the movement is so strong in Honduras, they can no longer hold what they've been trying to hold for all these years. And right now we see that the embassy is kind of cornered. We don't know what they're going to do, but they're not as aggressive as they have been. And as a Honduran here in the United States and a citizen of the United States, this is my message for the United States government, right? Because Kamala Harris supposedly is concerned about these caravans, right? Because Honduras, the levels of poverty, since the coup that have been deepening, And this is pretty much what they want to do to countries like Venezuela and Nicaragua and Cuba, right? 60 years of a horrendous criminal blockade and what they did in Bolivia. But this is what they want to do. They want to turn these countries into other Honduras. They want to have real narco traffickers like Juan Orlando Hernandez in these countries. Their talks to play their game, right? So right now, what we see is that we're not sure about the role of the U.S. Embassy. They're not as aggressive as they have been. That doesn't mean that we trust them, but we do have a message as the Honduran people in Honduras and here too. I'm just going to read you the conclusion of an article that I just recently wrote, and that our compañeros from Struggle La Lucha published. That it's really cool, and I thank them for doing that. And you can find this article on Struggle La Lucha. It's called 12 Years After the Coup, Honduran Resistance Fights for Fair Elections. And that's all that we want. Because if they will to allow us, and I mean the United States and its puppets there, these representatives, because they're not even ambassadors. The United States doesn't even have an ambassador in Honduras. This is how bad they treat us. It's like we don't even, we don't even deserve to have a real.
Don't even rank for an ambassador.
Yeah, Honduras is such a whatever disposable country that they don't even deserve to have an ambassador. Yet, even these representatives like that, even though they were not ambassadors, they will run the show. These people will come in and supervise the polls. Can you imagine somebody coming from Honduras to try to tell the United States how to run their elections? I mean, that's crazy. Right? The United States made such a big fuss about Russia, like sniffing into their elections, right, and sniffing into their democratic process. Yet they want to run our elections. They want to run our show, and this is how they do it. So, but they're concerned, they say, about what's happening with the caravans and the crisis at the border, right? They want to do something, they say. So we tell them, if you really want to do something, leave us alone as countries. But this is my message to the United States government, as I put it in this article. I said, to the U.S. government and the embassy in Honduras, we say, if you do not want to continue facing, right, the massive exodus of people from your failed imperial displaced people, from your failed neoliberal policies in Honduras, because the caravans are an absolute result of the failed neoliberal system in Honduras and U.S. imperial failed policies as well. And what has happened there is that the United States has turned our country into an exporter of displaced people. And if we don't change the situation right now in the country, after the 28th, Terry and Leonardo and Camilo and Fred, we will have an Honduras that perhaps will look very different than the Honduras that we know right now, because it just hasn't been enough to impose these neoliberal failed policies in Honduras, deepen the misery that we have as a country that has people leaving massively in the caravans because they cannot take it anymore. They cannot take the violence. They cannot take the abuse. They cannot take the violence of poverty and everything that the people of Honduras are facing right now. On top of it, this narco government headed by Juan Orlando Hernandez has sold a big part of our territory to this new business called las sedes, or zones of jobs and development. What does that mean? That in Honduras, these transnationals will build inner cities in which the Honduran people cannot live anymore. And these people don't care. They have given away our territory. And these new cities that they will build within Honduras, they will have their own governments, they will have their own laws, they will have their own not political system, but legal systems in which they will not respond to the original Honduran constitution. They will have their own mini constitutions. So we'll have within Honduras places like Shanghai, Dubai, super developed within Honduran cities that us as Hondurans, we're not going to be able to go. They say that if you want to in the future join one of those model cities, you will have to have an income of at least $60,000 a month, $60,000 a month. Who's gonna make that kind of money in
That's
Honduras?
nobody in Honduras, nobody born and raised in Honduras.
Nobody
or very
born and
few.
raised in Honduras. No
Very few.
self-respected Honduras
At
will have
least
that
not with
kind
the
of money.
current system.
So this is what we are facing. We practically have lost our country to these narcos, and this is the kind of thugs that the United States government is facing there, is supporting there, and this is why we tell them, if you don't want to have your crisis, what they call it their crisis, of the displaced people of neoliberalism, leave us alone. Allow them to elect the people that we want, and let us be, what we want to be. Let us have the leaders that we want. Take away your hands of our countries and leave us alone, But this is the problem with the United States. They don't want to leave us alone because they want what's there from us. They want our resources, they want our land, but they hate us. They don't want the people, but they want our resources and they want our land. But in Honduras, we're fighting for that. And the government that Xiomara is going to lead calls for all of that. These people have to get out of our country. These business people who purchase the land, supposedly they purchase it, they're gonna have to get out. And we need to reclaim our dignity. We need to reclaim our sovereignty, and the United States needs to stay away. That's what we're saying. If you want to help us, just get the hell out of our country.
Well, Lucy, I think you're going to follow Xiomara as president someday. I love you. I will say, I think, as you know, I'll be in Honduras on November 28th. So I will be very proud to be there and witness your presidential elections on the 28th. And I'm always so thankful for your activism and your love of your work and your passion and your knowledge. Everyone's knowledge that's been on the panel this evening. You're all so great. And like I told the audience when we started, it's just been wonderful to have a panel of guests who, are such fabulous activists, but also I will say all of you are just such great personal friends as well. And I'm just really honored that you all had time to join us this evening. When we started the program, Fred had asked me if there'd be time for some questions, and specifically from him. And so why don't we take a few minutes and have a quick Q&A. We'll have Fred start, and for the audience, if you're watching us on Zoom, you can put your question in the chat, and also if you're watching us on CODEPINK YouTube Live, you can make a comment in the chat as well, and I'll be sure to check both platforms for any questions and comments. So
Okay.
Fred, welcome back to the conversation.
Thank you. Very informative. The panelists really, I think, enlightened us about the present situation. Just one question for Camilo and one for Leonardo. Camilo, 2018, which you described as attempted coup, a golpismo, really at the time divided some of the progressive forces in the United States. So the mainstream media campaign was pretty successful in dominating the imagery of what was going on in 2018. So my question for you is, how do you respond to those who are, still, we can say, progressive forces that had these very intense misgivings about 2018? Because I think you began to address it. It's very important given that we're facing another media campaign in the present moment. And a question for Leonardo is, you mentioned a poll that said that for 50% of Venezuelans, life was getting somewhat better since August. And so we also received reports from United Nations rapporteur that the situation is still extremely difficult. And part of the reason that we're so intensely against these sanctions is because of the hardship. So maybe you could just go a little bit more into what you think the implications of that poll are, and if we can compare that to these other testimonies that we're receiving about the situation in Venezuela.
Okay, Camilo.
Thank you, Fred. That's a really great question. I'll try to be brief because I know we don't have that much time. But this is part of that effort, that we have been working with people on the ground in Nicaragua, a lot of solidarity workers who have lived there for decades and continue to do an excellent job as internationalists in Nicaragua. We have published a couple of books on the attempted coup and some of the things that happened afterwards. I believe that we have been very successful in taking over social media platforms, at least in Nicaragua, and that's one of the reasons why they have canceled so many accounts. Programs like this, I think, are really great. And then also, when people tend to fall for the here and now, what they're seeing, which is the result of, this propaganda campaign, I think it always helps to point out to history and, show to people how history is basically repeating itself. When you look at US intervention, and even if you go back to the Spanish colony, if you want to go really that far, and you're going to see that, the same players are in, a part of the our own stage right now, the bourgeoisie, the same political groups, of the past, that were fighting for power and leaving the poor out at all times, the oligarchy, the Catholic Church, the hierarchical Catholic Church, and of course the US. And then also follow the money trail and see how a lot of the groups, if not all of the groups, are connected to US money via USAID and National Endowment for Democracy. So this is the work that we're doing, working in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in places like Honduras and of course Venezuela, Cuba, etc., so that we can show a larger context, so we can show a historical context, and so that we can empower people to with the tools that they need in order to understand, the new landscape in which, conventional war is not even a part of the picture, but we're looking at lawfare or hybrid war or soft coups or however you want to call it. It's really hard to understand for people, especially because the USAID money and the NED money have created an entire ecosystem of on the surface, progressive organizations, dedicated to environmental protection and women's rights and worker rights and peasant rights and whatnot, that have been trained and financed by the US, basically to lend that face of, progressivism, when in reality, they're fronts for US interventionism in Nicaragua. But those are some of the things that we do, that we will continue to do. It's an ongoing struggle, and we learn as we go, because what we're doing today, it's very different from what we were doing 2-3 years ago.
Thank you.
Okay, and then, so the poll I mentioned, it was 50% of Venezuelans said their life had improved compared to 1 or 2 years ago, and that poll was taken in August. And I think that does square in with everything the UN's been saying about the impact of the sanctions, because Venezuela's economy was completely devastated by the sanctions. And I think the poll, what it reflects is the fact that the Venezuelan government has been able to overcome the sanctions in important ways. Most importantly, through the CLAP program, which is boxes of food and other essentials that 7 million families receive every month in Venezuela, 7 million families in a country of 30 million people. And so through programs like the CLAP and through really, the intense efforts of the government to restart oil production, we're seeing a little bit of growth in the economy, a little bit of stability. That said, I didn't mean to paint a rosy picture at all. The economy is still a disaster compared to what it was 5-6 years ago, and that's entirely due to the U.S. economic war. There's such brutal policies that have, killed 100,000 Venezuelans, according to Alfred de Zayas, former special UN rapporteur. They killed 40,000 Venezuelans in the first year of the Trump sanctions alone, according to the Center for Economic and Policy Research. So the sanctions are still having a really devastating impact, particularly on the healthcare sector in Venezuela. And we still have rolling blackouts, shortages of water, shortage of internet dropouts, transportation issues. So the issues, are still there, of course, but Venezuela has been resilient in the face of those sanctions. And yet, I think there's still a lot of work to be done on the sanctions front. As you mentioned in your opening remarks, the Biden administration kind of sabotages the ongoing dialogue between the government and the extreme right with the extradition of Alex Saab, or the kidnap of Alex Saab, I should say. So the sanctions remain kind of an important factor that affects the daily life of every single Venezuelan. Things are slightly better. I don't think Venezuela can possibly ever recover economically if the sanctions are not lifted.
Can I just make a personal comment as I listen to you, Leo, and listening to the impact of the sanctions? And as you know, I have visited your country, at least once over the last 15, 20 years, and have seen the full cycle. And I have to say to you and all of your fellow countrymen, it is the most profound thing to witness how strong the Venezuelan people are in their resistance. It's palpable when you're on the streets. An hour on the streets of Caracas, and you can just feel that the Venezuelan people, they totally understand politically and economically what's happening to them. They understand hybrid war. They understand U.S. interventionism, don't want it, and really, it's a profound thing to witness. I don't personally know anyone except those of you living in Venezuela who could really quite honorably survive this war that's been against the country through sanctions. It's really, it's a profound thing to witness. And you all deserve a lot of credit for that, for surviving it so far. So, there's something, Lucy, that you said that, and now that Leo has brought back up Alex, I totally forgot that President Zelaya was kidnapped in his pajamas in the coup. And so we just, this kidnapping technique that the United States uses, this over judicial reach of the United States throughout the world. Can any of you comment on that? I mean, we've seen this, what is called extradition, but a flat out kidnap of Alex Saab.
Just want to add, Aristide was also,
yes,
we could say,
thank you.
kidnapped. He was democratically elected president of Haiti.
Yes.
And that was actually the plan for Operation Gideon in Venezuela, the so-called mercenary invasion. They planned to kidnap President Maduro and take him out of the country. The same thing happened in 2002 in Venezuela when the plan was to kidnap Chavez, and they actually did. They didn't manage to take him out of the country. He stayed in the country. But it's a common theme we see in terms of U.S. intervention.
And Noriega, we remember in Panama, whatever you think of Noriega, he too is flown out of the country.
And in Honduras, it's easy for the United States to do that, because let's not forget that the United States has the largest U.S. air base of Central America in Honduras, Sotocano or Palmerola, which hosts approximately 600 effective militaries. And it is also what I call the cave of the Southern Commander, El Comando Sur, La Cueva, the cave of the Southern Commander. So when President Zelaya was taken out of his house, gunned down, right? He was taken into that military base in Comayagua. That's where he was taken. And, later we learned that a phone call was made to the Pentagon, and this is when they were ordered to take him and to drop him in the airport of Costa Rica, because initially the order was to kill President Zelaya, but then they took him there. This killer Romeo Vázquez Velázquez, who's the general who actually kidnapped President Zelaya, said that the order was to kill him. So that was supposed to be a magnicide, not just a kidnap, but a magnicide of the president. And then he got nervous, and so that's why he took him to who gave him the order, the people, the owners of the military base. And that's where they said, just take him and drop him in Costa Rica. And this is where, President Zelaya was missing for some hours. And then early in the morning, that's when we learned that he was in the airport. This is where he gave the initial, interview that this is what had happened to him. He was still in his pajamas when he gave his first interviews at the airport in Costa Rica.
So Lucy,
President Joe Biden was the vice president. Let's not forget that, right?
Exactly.
Biden was vice president. Let's not forget that.
Lucy, can I ask you about electoral observation in Honduras? Because I know that the OAS will be there, and we saw what the OAS did in Bolivia, and what the OAS itself, how they kind of folded in the pressure of the Trump administration in 2017 when there's so many irregularities. Is that a fear again that the OAS is going to somehow interfere in this process?
Well, Xiomara has already been meeting with a lot of the delegations that are there, and the OAS is one of them that she already met with. And they normally don't do anything prior to the elections. They intervene the day off and towards the countdown. This is when they come in and do the job. So they're there already, and they have met with our candidate, but we don't really know what they have at stake this year, but they have always been the players. What I can tell you is that Almugre, do you know mugre, the mugre, that you get the disgusting stuff in your nails? Almugre, we call him. He met with the, yeah, I know, right? Only those who are bilingual can get the joke. Almugre. And I'm a language teacher, so I'm sorry. I do these kind of things with language. I think humor is important too. You know, especially when we attack the enemy, it's good to kill them with humor. So Almugre met with the candidate for Juan Orlando Hernandez in Washington. This was in around August. He met with Nasri Alfura, who is the candidate of the National Party, who is supposedly the successor of Juan Orlando Hernandez. To us, they're the same cartel, right? And so Almagro came forward and said that he had met with the candidate of the National Party in Washington. And they had a very interesting conversation. So we know what his inclination is. He's a golpista. He's a coup plotter. He plotted the coup in Bolivia. He's been, leading what happened in Ecuador, right, against President Correa. Let's not forget that either. And so it's time we change the OAS for something that dignifies the people of Latin America. This guy, Almagro, he has to go. And so does the OAS. We need a real organization of the people of Latin America, not what we have right now. That's a extension of the Pentagon and the Department of State. We don't need that.
So, Leo, I wonder, we've been talking just briefly about the OAS, and Leo is leading a project at CODEPINK that is, shifting the OAS. And Leo lost his camera, but I think he's with us. I think you still have your audio.
I do still have it. Sorry about the camera
issue. No, that's okay.
No, and just briefly, so, as folks know who've been following CODEPINK, we've been calling for Almagro's resignation for almost 2 years now since the coup in Bolivia. And it's kind of this campaign to get rid of Almagro to replace the OAS. We're also starting a campaign to get rid of the statue of Queen Isabella, which is right next to the front door of the OAS. It's a gross symbol of racism and genocide and imperialism, and has no place in front of the OAS. And we're starting an open letter, hopefully to be signed by prominent activists and intellectuals and journalists and others and politicians. So I'm going to invite all of you to sign, of course, and soon we'll open it up to the general public. But I just wanted to let folks know that's in the works from CODEPINK.
So thank you so much. So everyone, any closing comments on the evening? I know for me, it's just been such an honor to be among all of you this evening. Really a joy. I would propose that we do this again early December and evaluate what November in the Americas looks like today and what it looks like the 1st of December, because there's a real opportunity for the Americas to look quite different within the next 30 days. And it'd be great to revisit.
Yeah,
after we see the change in Honduras.
I would like to just make one observation that for those who are very concerned about the flow of refugees from Latin America north, let's note that there have been very few refugees coming from Nicaragua, which is practically has food security, despite the fact that there's still poverty to be overcome. So if the US seeks to undermine these elections in Nicaragua, they can expect to have even a larger refugee issue at the border. So the very process of meddling in the internal affairs of sovereign nations ends up having consequences that lead to double victimization. First, Hondurans, for example, are victimized in their own country by the disaster of the post-coup, and then once again, when they seek refuge in the United States.
Thank you, Fred, for threading the needle on that. When we talk about root causes of migration, we often don't talk about U.S. foreign policy. We'll talk about climate change, state violence, underdevelopment of economics, but U.S. foreign and economic policy is a huge creation of migration. So listen, everyone, thank you for your participation.
Didi, can
Yeah.
I give a final thought?
Of course.
I just want to say that not only in Honduras are we going for a definite political transformation that is a systemic transformation that we called for, and this is why we are having a woman run for president. So not only are we going to be transforming the reality of our country, but the face of having the first female president is the first signal of that. And I don't want to forget Haiti in this entire conversation about displaced people and the way that the United States treats, our government treats people once they get to their borders. Look at the horrendous crisis of the Haitian displaced people at the US-Mexican border recently. And it is the same with the Central Americans, particularly the ones that are coming from what they call the North Triangle. So let's pay close attention to what is going on in Honduras, because Honduras has been a country that historically we don't really pay that much mind to, because Honduras has always been subdued by US imperialism and capitalism. We have been the military platform of the United States for all these years, but Honduras has been in rebellion for the past 12 years, and Honduras is fighting for real independence, away from the dictates of Washington, trying to find its own destiny, the way the Hondurans want it, not the way that Washington wants to impose it. So let's pay close attention to what is going on there, because a lot of wonderful things could come out of what happens after the 28th. And we're very hopeful. We're not triumphant, but we're feeling victorious, because it's the third time around, and we have learned a lot, and we have prepared a lot for what is coming on the 28th. But we expect great things to happen. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. So everyone, I hope we can have, part 2 of this conversation early December, and really look at the results of the elections this month. So like when we opened the conversation tonight, we said we've got elections in Nicaragua on the 7th, Argentina on the 14th, Chile and Venezuela on the 21st, and Honduras on the 28th. So a real opportunity for transformation, and I'd love the chance to evaluate all of those election results in 30 days. So I want to thank all of you, Fred Mills, Camila Mejía, Leonardo Flores, and you, Lucy Pagoada-Quesada. Thank you for a terrific conversation. Thank you for your activism and your knowledge and your friendship. I love all of you, and I'm so happy you all had time this evening for this event. And let's talk in December. I also should remind our audience, you've been watching What the F is Going On in Latin America and the Caribbean, CODEPINK's weekly YouTube program of hot news out of the region. We broadcast every Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific on CODEPINK YouTube Live. And a shout out to Lucy's program on WBAI every Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern. And Lucy has been gracious enough to ask me to give an update from Managua on election day here. So I'll be happy to join you on Sunday
Thank
for a
you.
few minutes at least, I hope.
Yes.
So thank you, everyone. And thank you to
Thank
our
you,
audience.
Terry.
We had a
Thank you,
Thank you
Terry.
so much.
Thanks,
Leonardo,
everyone.
Lucy.
so
Hasta
wonderful
la
to see all
victoria
of you.
siempre.
Hasta la victoria siempre.
Venceremos.
Venceremos.